I'm Psychologist Dr. Bryan Violet. Today I'll be sitting down with Dave Mantese. He's an aspiring author in the genre of magical realism. We'll be talking about his life as a young Catholic and what that means for questions of vocation and The Sinner in a Movie, his choice this week, Silence. This is the Catholic Sitter Show. Tell me about, well, I guess we should probably begin with you explaining a little bit about the genre that you're writing in, because it's unique. It's sort of like fantastical nonfiction. Like, what would we call it, and then how would you describe it?
I think either realistic fiction at a base level, but then a little more than that, probably magical realism.
Okay.
Magical realism. And I think, I don't know when, this kind of started, this genre.
Yeah.
I mean, who can say when things start?
Yes.
Exactly.
With you.
Well, the first one, yeah. But I think a lot of it comes from, especially South American literature.
Okay.
Like Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a very famous name. I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote 1,000 Years of Solitude, it's called.
Okay.
And basically, as kind of normal events, you live in sort of a normal world.
Right.
And as normal events go on, you encounter seemingly just supernatural and kind of mystical things.
Yes.
That you kind of just take for granted. You kind of suspend your disbelief and you say like, oh, this is just, part of this world.
Yes.
And so, there might be, I think in some of the South American books, there's a character who might be walking along and he is followed all the time by like a flock of butterflies. I don't know, flock maybe a
Sure.
group of butterflies.
Or gaggle? No, those are geese.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know. And so it's kind of just like, well, that's just part of his character. That's who he is.
He's just followed by butterflies. And it's never explained?
Probably not, yeah. There's another kind of famous one. It's like this kind of endless library. And have you ever seen Interstellar?
It's on my list. I sort of wish you chose it for our Sinner in a Movie.
We won't be talking about that today.
I really want to see that movie, but I have not seen Interstellar, no.
But in that, not to give away too much, there is this kind of endless library that Christopher Nolan puts in the movie and uses it in ways we won't spoil. But that kind of comes from this South American literature too.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of seeing sort of magical elements just in a more or less ordinary world.
And in a subtle way.
In anything from subtle to more extreme.
More extreme.
More extreme.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do with my book is incorporate some of that such that, and it works well with Japan specifically, which is kind of the content of my book.
Right.
Japan is, if you've ever seen, I don't know, Studio Ghibli films, have you ever seen
I have not,
those?
no.
Okay. Hayao Miyazaki is a very famous Japanese animated director.
Okay.
And so all of his movies, although they are basically just fantasy, but they use kind of the nature element that is beloved in Japan, Mount Fuji, and all the forests and the sea. The Great Wave is one of the more
Cherry
famous
blossom trees.
Cherry blossoms,
Yes.
yeah. So they use nature, but they kind of take it to the next level.
Enhance it.
Yeah,
amplify it.
He uses a lot of like forest spirits and things like that. And so Japan kind of has this mysticism around it.
You're the way I like to have these interviews, I like to have them in discrete segments, and you're blowing that up for me because the movie choice, I know you have a fascination with Japanese culture, and the movie choice is about two priests in Japan, but I'm going to try and keep that compartmentalized as much as possible. As excited as I am to talk to you about the film, I'm not going to bring it up right now. But you do have a love for Japanese culture, but going back to what you're writing, let's stay on the writing. Stay focused, Dr. Bryan. So that sounds cool. In some ways, it does remind me of even a healthy Catholic worldview and the way we approach life, and that everything is seemingly of the natural order, except for those few times when you pay close enough attention, something seems to be a little bit extra in our experience.
Yeah, right.
like God's intervention in the world, something feels a little bit supernatural, which may be able to be explained through the natural order, maybe not.
Right.
I mean, certainly miracles happen where, boom,
Yeah.
this is not of this world. But I think in general, you hear the term signal graces. It's one of the promises to those who recite the rosary from the Blessed Mother, is receiving signal graces. What's a signal grace? Signal grace is God will demonstrate to you that he is speaking to you very specifically through a sequence of events in the natural order, right? And so what you're describing reminds me of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of worldview just makes life more interesting, I think. I mean, if you live with a perspective that everything can be explained away, that kind of makes life less interesting. It kind of makes things more mundane, I think.
Yeah, the true form of the word mystery, the mysterium, it's not, I cannot penetrate this thing.
Yeah.
It's that I can always penetrate more.
Yeah.
Right? I can keep on going deeper, eternally. God is mystery, or even a person is mysterious. It's not that I don't know you, but there's always more to know.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so, what about your book? I mean, you're citing these great writers. And actually, before we even get there, are there, just so our audience might be more familiar, does this type of literature make its way to film ever? Is there anything that people would be familiar with for this style or this genre?
I mean, something like Interstellar is a good example, because it uses, well, kind of that specific reference, but also it uses it uses an excuse of kind of science, hard science, to slip kind of unexpectedly or kind of subtly into science fiction. So, if you don't really kind of know the science well enough, or even if you do, you could say, well, actually, one step further is kind of the supernatural or science fiction.
But it begins with the supernatural, right? I mean, science fiction is typically supernatural, and then it works backwards.
Right.
And if you don't have enough scientific knowledge, you'd say, that's not how physics works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if you don't, and you're watching the film, it's like the lines are blurred between the natural and the supernatural in terms of how science is explained.
Sort of. Though even there are some things my dad's a physicist, so I've kind of grown up with some of this, but there are some things in physics itself that seem almost supernatural. Like if you talk about relativity, and that's something that's explored in this movie. Now we're talking about Interstellar all the time. I don't know how we got there, but in this movie, if you travel close to the speed of light, you undergo like time dilation, and so your time frame is actually different. And so, again, not to spoil too much, but the main character in the movie passes very close to a black hole, and kind of his timeline changes such that he becomes younger than his daughter. And that is actually something that could happen. Theoretically happen. There's been twin studies where one twin kind of flies around in an airplane for many years, and one twin just stays stable. And using atomic clocks, you can kind of tell, okay, this twin actually is younger by, maybe fractions of a second or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's a very small scale thing. But if you were to blow it up kind of with going closer to the speed of light, not just flying on a commercial jet, these things could happen, and yet they seem completely supernatural, fictitious, whatever you want to say.
So this is just like dinner time conversation with you and your dad growing up?
We've discussed things over the years.
Not to digress too much, I want to get back to your writing, but now I'm all very interested in what it's like growing up in a home with a dad who's a physicist.
Yeah, always interesting dinner conversations, certainly. There was a period of time, there's a kind of the classics of physics are the Feynman lectures on physics, they're called. And Richard Feynman was a very famous physicist who probably is mostly known for, he had to deal with the kind of the review of the whole Challenger explosion.
Right.
So he kind of was trying to get to the bottom of that. But he wrote a series of physics lectures for his
So the
class.
Challenger was the flight where the teacher was sent up into space,
Right.
and it exploded
Right.
on television.
Yes.
It was in the
live.
80s. I remember.
Live,
I remember this. I mean, I was very young. It must have been.
Yeah.
I don't remember. 86. Maybe?
I wasn't around at all. So.
You were very young.
Yeah.
You were a twinkle.
Negative years.
You were a twinkle in your dad's eye.
But yeah, this physicist, he wrote these lectures that are kind of considered like the absolute fundamentals, and actually more than fundamentals even. They're kind of almost everything you need to know for a basic physics degree, I guess, or whatever. And so we were reading them together.
Can you give me an example of a basic that someone would need to know?
I mean, I guess you'd start
Talk
with...
about mysterium. Like, I think the whole field of physics is so attractive and mysterious, and we just had the Oppenheimer film come out not too long ago, and it's all mathematical, but it seems fantastical, and I know it's involved in like the Millennium Falcon and time travel in Star Wars, but I'm not quite sure how. So what would be a fundamental principle that someone would need to know?
I mean, I guess the
theory of relativity is it's reached the popular jargon.
There's kind of,
like an object, like Newton's laws, things like that.
So you could start
an object at rest tends to stay at rest.
The most basic, would be mechanics. So you use vectors, they're called mathematical vectors, to show something's position, something's velocity, something's acceleration.
Right.
And you can use calculus to kind of derive those things.
So you and Dad are in the backyard, and you're throwing a ball, and you're talking about vectors. Is that what we're looking at?
Not exactly,
Okay.
but we've had some interesting dinner conversations, that's for sure.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. All right, so let's go back to the work and the writing. So tell me about your writing. What are you writing about?
Yeah, so at the heart of the book is my experience, and I guess we'll get to this, but my experience living in Japan for a year. So I kind of set it in my time in Japan, and kind of the people I've met, and kind of the events that I experienced and things like that. And that in and of itself was very rewarding for me. And I think there's a lot of fun stories to share with people. But travel books have kind of been done a lot. So I'd like to be able to take it kind of to the next level where it's not just, I went here, I saw this site, I met this person, and kind of bring it a little bit kind of to a novel form almost, with a little bit of twists here and there, using, again, the world of Japan as a useful tool.
Based on a true story.
Based on a true story, a fictitious me, I guess.
So, but you're arranging the events into a larger narrative for novel purposes?
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah. That's exciting. And do you have an overarching theme that you're working towards? I mean, you said it was an important experience for you. It was a positive experience for you. Is that the message that you want to convey? Is there something extra to what your particular experience was?
Yeah, I think there's a few themes. One of them, I think, is finding acceptance in a society, especially one that isn't your own.
Being accepted.
I see. Being
Yeah.
accepted.
Yeah.
And Japan is known for being one of the hardest cultures to break into.
A swamp.
A swamp.
We'll talk more about this later. Stay tuned, folks. Go on. Yeah.
And so, it's hard to make friends as a foreigner. Maybe as a native Japanese person, too. I saw some of that. But there's a language component that's obviously really difficult. There's kind of a cultural understanding component.
The nuance.
The way you communicate, things that you don't say specifically in conversation but are understood. And if you don't know how to read those, it can cause problems. So what you say doesn't always line up with what is meant. Yeah. From an American standpoint. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's even true within the United States. There's variations and shades of that. I think it's true. Yeah. Right? I mean, I'm from the Northeast, and I tend to say what I mean in the moment. Yeah, that's right.
That's not always true in different regions of the country. I mean, you're from Michigan originally?
I grew up, in Michigan, and I
Yeah.
moved here when I was, 8 or something like that.
Okay. So you probably weren't at a point where you're sophisticated enough to recognize the cultural differences, or
A little bit. I mean, I guess I was in like third grade, so
you're like, these kids are rude.
I guess there's the biggest thing I could tell was probably if you go to, I don't know, a Walmart or something in
Sure.
Michigan or
Yeah.
in the Midwest, probably in general.
Yeah.
The chances of someone just standing behind you in line, striking up a conversation with you,
Or high.
are a lot higher than here. Yeah. Here it's kind of like, all right, let's keep our zones, and
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And you picked up on that at an early age.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So, in terms of your experience of being accepted there, did you feel rejected at times, or was that a painful experience?
I don't know if I would say rejected, because there was never really any overt sort of antagonism I faced. I've heard stories of people that, whether they're American and there's bitterness for even World War II stuff, or whatever it might be, they get actually set upon.
Like bullied.
Bullied,
Yeah.
yeah. But I never got that. It was more just kind of sometimes it felt like neglect, almost like here I am, and, I'm trying to make an effort to engage and talk to people, but I think at a certain point, if your language ability isn't up to par, and if some of the people that work there and live there know that you're kind of just another face passing through, and in a year or two you're going to be replaced by someone else, some other American, British person, why bother putting effort into this relationship if it's not going to last?
Yeah. And how old were you when you were over there?
This was just, it was 2022, 2023. So
very
it's just,
recent.
Yeah.
Very recent.
Pretty fresh off of it.
And why were you there?
I was there to teach English for a year.
One of these programs.
On one of these programs.
Yeah. So you were attempting to connect with other adults. It's not like you were a school-age kid and kids are mean.
Right.
Just
right.
like even at a mature level, you experienced this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, and each situation is different, because the way the program's called the JET program, the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. It's funded by the Japanese government.
I see.
And so
someone was sent here to teach Japanese.
No, it's called exchange, but it doesn't actually work so much like that. We just get sent there.
I think we got hoodwinked.
There was no Japanese Dave coming here.
Yeah.
But yeah, they kind of, so the vetting process takes place here, and you submit an application and everything, and then from a kind of central hub in Tokyo, they read your application and kind of accept you, and then they, through some mysterious process, decide where to put you. And so for me, it was like, they said, pick your top 3 places that you'd like to go. And I put, Kyoto and a couple other pretty well-known places. And then I guess they must have just ripped that list off, because I got sent somewhere I'd never even heard of. And after they do that, it's kind of out of their hands. So some people get put in places that are very good and conduce to their happiness and their success, which I would say I actually did get that for the most part.
For what reasons? What made it conducive to your happiness?
The people that I met, despite times that, yes, I felt pretty isolated, the people were very, very generous and very, very kind. And even, schools that were down the road from me, there would be people I talked to, other foreigners, who would say, I cannot stand working here. These people are like very nasty to me and stuff. So it's like, wow, if I was 200 yards over there, could be a lot different. So,
wow. Well, that's a gift.
I did feel very blessed.
Yeah, but still lonely.
But still lonely at times. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. These teachers that are Japanese teachers and work there full time, they're overworked.
Their own lives.
They have their own lives.
Yeah.
And so, you go to your apartment at the end of the day, and
That's
just
it.
you, and it's,
So then, going back to the book, do you feel that, you said it's a book about acceptance, but I imagine along the way it's a book about loneliness?
it's a book about loneliness, trying to deal with being accepted and just understanding how to fit in, I guess, into surrounding.
You know, you said there wasn't an overt rejection of you that you experienced, but you know, from what I do in my field, we talk about different ways in which there is disconnection between the self and others, and walling someone off is, I mean, not to get into complex psychological theory, but it's on the end of not love, and you could substitute hate, for, you know, to categorize that type of interpersonal behavior, but it's not active. It's not active expression of hate, but it can be a passive version of it. It's an emancipating hate, right? It's I'm cutting myself off from you. I'm walling you off. I'm not bringing you in, and so it can be like almost like a passive aggressive sort of rejection. Yeah,
that, you know, this might get into stereotyping or something like that, but there is kind of a sense in Japan. It's very much a hands-off kind of culture, and if you have a problem with someone or something, the solution is to just run away, basically, and not deal with it. To kind of wall it off.
Yeah.
And so there were stories I heard of some of the other teachers or foreign teachers who had been there for a few more years than I had, who would say, you know, there was this kid, he was getting bullied in school, and you know, here it's like, I don't know, maybe you'd punch the guy or something, punch him back, or at least you'd probably report it and something would maybe hopefully be done about it. There, the solution is more, all right, I'm going to stay home for the rest of the year and not come into school. And the teachers actually don't see a problem with that for the most part.
Wow.
If that's what you're dealing with, then you stay home, you come in maybe twice a year to take your tests. Those will allow you to probably pass to the next grade.
Wow.
And then you just go on from there, and I guess you never really address the problem.
Oh my goodness. I don't think I could live there. I think I would be such a fish out of water.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm the type of person that can't go to bed angry. I want to talk about it. I'm a pursuer. I want to hash things out until things are better. Yeah, the avoidance and the walling off would have been really hard for me.
It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also stories of, you know, when you're an older person and you don't want to deal with some of the problems of old age or family issues or something like that. There are many reports of people that are older kind of just disappearing, like one day just kind of walking off. What? And the privacy issue in Japan is such that like privacy is really, really important.
Yes.
And so the police will like not try to search for that person basically because they want to respect their privacy, but they've just walked out. And so there's a lot of these cases of like just vanishing persons in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah, it's, you know, I guess you don't have to deal with your problems.
It's a different culture.
Yeah.
It's a different culture. I mean, I think it generates new problems, but those particular problems you don't have to address.
Yeah.
Wow, so interesting. So, wow, it's exciting. I mean, the book sounds interesting. I mean, can you give me, I don't want you to give your whole work away, but any thoughts about how you make it fantastical? Like, what are some things that you, literary techniques that you're using?
Well, so there's one scene I incorporated where I guess this ties in well because not only is it fantastical, but it deals with isolation. And that is, I've been trying to draw from kind of the treasure of like Japanese literature because there's a lot of fairly modern Japanese literature that's pretty good, but it doesn't always make its way into the West in popularity. And one of them, the book is called I Am a Cat. And it's about a cat who speaks in a very arrogant style because the Japanese have different ways of speaking, and he speaks in
I think cats, I don't know if you've seen all my episodes, but I do go into my feelings about cats, and I think they are arrogant.
I think that's, if they had a voice, yes, they would probably, for us, they would probably sound like, you know, some British, high British accent.
Yeah, I mean, dogs have owners, cats have staff.
I think that's true. From some of my friends that own cats, I've seen that.
Yes. So go on, sorry.
But the story, so there's this cat that's actually a stray, but he's still he has a lot of dignity and he's very proud of himself. And so he kind of views the Japanese middle class of the early 20th century and comments on their kind of weak points and he judges them. He spends the whole book judging people, and so it was the author's way of kind of using a cat to comment on then current Japanese society.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the way you draw this in is, in my book, as I'm getting used to dealing with the new office environment and the teachers and the students and everything, I kind of, my fictional self, realizes, like, what am I to these people actually? Am I kind of just like a prop? Maybe I'm actually kind of a cat. And so my character actually then becomes a cat for at least the span of a chapter or so. And,
Without much, with no need for explanation.
Yeah, not really. Just I'm actually a cat, and there I am. And so you like, and then how do you deal with that? You have to weave in between the legs of students then, instead of walking, with them, sort of at the same level.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
So.
That reminds me of. Do you ever? This is an obscure reference, but have you ever seen Will Ferrell's audition for Saturday Night Live?
I have not.
I almost want to link in the description, folks. It's amazing. Go check it out, because he nails the position on Saturday Night Live, and he just does this 2 minutes of acting like a cat, and he'll just be relaxed and sleeping for a moment, and then he'll sit up real quick and he'll play with an imaginary ball and then look back, and I mean he just captures it perfectly. So I am a cat.
I'll have to do some research.
Yeah, he embodied that. Yeah. So tell me about your writing process. How do you? I know there's different sorts for different people, and as many ways as there are people. How do you approach writing?
It's always a struggle.
So why do it?
Because when you come up with great ideas and then they actually click,
yes,
it's very, very rewarding.
Yes.
Even if some days are really, really frustrating.
Yes.
But
the execution.
The execution is the hardest. Yeah. I mean, it's fun when you outline things at a broad level and you say, oh, this is going to be great. Mm-hmm. And then you sit down and then you have to type on the keys each letter, and it's like, how do I make this sound right? But for me, at least, I like a lot of quiet. I can't really work too well in a coffee shop or things like that. So I like to go to the libraries and things like that. I try to do at least a couple hours in the morning. That seems to be my best time. And I've kind of realized...
You're a caffeine consumer?
I don't actually, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I kind of just get up and, I guess I can manage.
Get up and go, yeah, okay.
But I guess I try to do it in the morning. But I've also found that, I guess, you can't force yourself.
That's right.
You can force yourself to write, but you can't necessarily force yourself to write well or to come up with ideas.
Yeah.
When they come, they come.
Yes.
And so if you find that, it's just not working that particular day, then you can cut it a little bit short. If you're really rolling with things, you can go a little bit longer. But once you reach a certain point when your brain just feels a little bit dry or a little bit broken or whatever, then I think it's best to just step away and either come back the next day or come back later in the day and pick it up again. And it seems to always be that, when I come back, it's like, oh, that thing that I was really stuck on yesterday, now it's working.
Yeah, worry is the misuse of imagination.
Right.
Yeah. I, for my creative process, what I've discovered, and by my creative process, I mean right now my creative energies are focused on the show.
Yeah.
And interviewing guests, what types of questions to ask, and thoughts on the film that are suggested to me. So for me, when I sit down in front of my computer and try to write questions, thoughts, observations, the thought of having to come up with something is enough to make me anxious and lock up my creative processes.
Yeah.
But I do all of my best writing, my best creative efforts for the show. I mean, anything creative. I mean, even musically.
Yeah.
In the shower. In the shower.
That's a good punchline.
Right afterwards, I make sure I always write down.
Yeah.
Because I'm one of those people that takes long showers.
Yeah.
I don't put limitations on my showers. That's the thing. You're putting limitations on yourself. Well, on myself when I'm sitting down to create and write something, produce something. But if I'm in the shower, it's just going to feel this, hot water.
Yeah.
I'll soap up quick, and then the rest I'm just there for as long as I want to be there.
Right.
And I don't know if it's about the water. It's like being back in the womb. It's the same.
This is a psychologist talking.
Yeah. I'm back in the womb, and it's warm, and it's safe, and it's like this cocoon of warm water on my back. But my thoughts just flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the pressure to have to produce.
Right.
Takes away from the creative process.
Right,
And so when I'm in the shower, it's like whatever comes up, whatever doesn't. But something always comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I would say it's probably on walks are good.
Mm.
Walks by myself, or sometimes when I'm with other people. But I guess I'd like to be talking to that person. So when I'm by myself and I'm walking or running, sometimes it's like sometimes something just comes up and it's like, oh wow.
Well, writing too is a singular process. I mean,
Right.
there are a lot of creative processes that are collaborative.
Right.
But you don't really get the opportunity to do that.
It's definitely good to talk to someone that you trust, even if they're not like a professional writer or whatever. And my brother is and my father, but my brother especially is a very useful. I'm blessed to have him as a.
I use him to my own ends.
Yes.
To further my career. I mean,
we got some Lord of the Rings, Star Wars themes here, but
your eyes turn red.
But he offers a lot of really good insight because he likes the things I like, and he kind of thinks a lot of very similarly to me. So sometimes he'll read something, and he'll say, this is what I kind of thought, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought too, but I just didn't want to admit it. So I'm glad that you.
Is this a younger brother?
Older brother.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's so cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
And so, where are you in the book? How much longer do you have to go?
You
putting pressure on yourself to complete it? Like,
I always tell myself I wish I could write this faster. I wish I could be more efficient with my writing. And yet I guess it kind of just goes along at a pretty steady pace. But yeah, I think right now my thoughts are I'm probably at a point where I'm basically a third done with the book.
Exciting.
So, yeah. Excluding editing, but
well, that's out of your hands.
But
at that point,
yeah,
right? You can do even your own kind of round of editing, but
yeah.
ultimately, if you're gonna put this out there somewhere,
yeah, I'd like to. I would definitely like to.
Cool. Are you gonna? How are you gonna do that? Are you gonna do it through Amazon or are you gonna go to a book publisher, like publishing company, or what are you gonna do?
I'd like to try the process of traditional publishing. I would. I think that even though that has a lot of hurdles to jump through or jump over.
They take all your money away.
Maybe. I think it would be a really good experience.
Yeah.
Even just to get rejected, just to get told that, we're not looking for this right now. If they reject you and give you good insight or give you good feedback, if they just reject you, there's some value in that because then you say, all right, I have to be patient. But
sure, there's like character development personally.
But if they reject you and they give you feedback, then that's really helpful too.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I'd like to experience that at least.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the rejection might just be relative to that publishing company.
True. Yeah.
And so they may not be looking for that, but you could try again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
There's a story I've heard where Stephen King, he put 2 nails in the wall right above his desk when he was just starting, and every time he got a rejection letter, he would stick it on the nail, and so he vowed that he would not stop writing. I think until he got through the first nail. So until he had a stack of papers that was enough to fill either the first nail or both nails, and I think it was halfway through his second nail, he got his first acceptance. So he had to go through a whole nail first before.
Yeah. So this is so interesting to me. I'm just like pulling a thread through a lot of this. I brought up the question about collaborative writing and collaborative creative processes. The theme of your book is about loneliness and like struggling to connect. The Stephen King story is about coming up with ways to self-motivate. And I thought about writing a book for a while. I had sort of an idea of writing, so I still have the ideas, but I didn't end up writing it. A lot of my energies have gone in this direction for the show, but I took a bunch of master classes at the time. The master class app.
Oh yeah.
And I was just listening to these writers over and over and over again, famous, successful writers, and it did strike me that there's like almost a loneliness to the experience of writing. You know, it's not a team sport.
Right.
And I mean, you know something about individual sports because you were a runner.
Yeah.
But you did. I wonder to what extent, like your history in running, which is about you and about your performance and everything relying on you, like lends itself to why you want to write and or the type of creative process that you want to engage in, where it's there's a lot of control and a lot of responsibility, and then a lot of potential for like blame or failure if it's on you. Like you can't blame your teammate. You can't blame someone else. Like, do you think that those are connected at all? Like your running experience? Maybe I'm stretching it. I got my psychology hat on and writing. But like in your own psychological development, is there like a solitary?
There's a certain probably self-discipline that is there. I mean, you have to. I mean, no one is going to finish the race for you.
Right.
When you're halfway through a 3-mile race and you just feel like
and you're ready to die,
giving up.
Yeah.
That one of my teammates said that every race he ran, about the halfway point, he drafted in his mind the letter he was going to write to our coach
about why he's quitting.
And he never did. So,
that's so funny.
But yeah, I guess you have to just get over that psychological wall. I guess writing's kind of the same way. It's there've been a lot of times writing this and some of the other writing I've done in the past where I've just, it's gotten to a point where either maybe I get a kind of a not so great feedback about something, or maybe it's just a bad day, I don't know what, and I just say, like, this is not going to go anywhere. Like, I should just throw this out. I should just delete it.
Yeah. The temptation to quit.
Yeah.
No, I understand that well. I think we're all faced with that.
Yeah.
I feel that with this show. I've felt it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what am I doing this for? Nobody's watching this. Nobody cares.
Yeah, it's hard.
I don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about hardware and technology or social media or all the things necessary that go into it. And there's that temptation to give up.
Yeah.
And I guess now I get real weird psychology speak. But what do you? Why don't you? Why don't you give up? Why do you want to write?
Yeah, I
What's the overarching motivation to put something out into the world from within you through writing?
I think it's probably two things mainly. One is that the content we have to consume currently is getting worse and worse by the year, it seems like.
Worse in what sense?
The level of creativity is very much lacking in movies and TV shows, and even I don't even know about the books market anymore. That seems like it died a few decades back even. But I think just from the very fact that you see Disney just remaking movies with live action people, prequels and sequels and whatever, just being kind of
taking heroes and making them the opposite sex.
Yes.
It's the same hero.
It's the same thing.
It's not a unique story.
Right,
the new hero. It's let's just subtly rework this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think true. there's we're kind of, and to a certain extent, it's not surprising because I know you've talked about cancel culture before, but if nothing is allowed, then there's no room for creative freedom, and so
true, the risk of offending people and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing, I think the other creative direction that people have gone in is away from comedy and into tragedy.
Yes.
In the Greek sense, it's like, well, this story, how can I be different? Well, they don't get together at the end.
Yes.
It's so binary. It's like everything fails and it doesn't work out. I'm an artist.
Yes. Yes.
And I have such fatigue of that.
I always noticed when we were assigned different kind of young adult books to read when I was in middle school or high school, whether it's like, I don't know, Bridge to Terabithia. I don't know if you know some of these.
I do know.
That one, or this other book called Tangerine, or some of these, what's his name? Brian Greene? Or no, I'm forgetting. The Fault in Our Stars guy. Something like that.
That I don't know.
The only way to make kind of something serious and dramatic and whatever, thoughtful, I guess, is just kill a kid. Yeah, I like this character, kill him. And then it becomes profound and deep, and not really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely, I agree. There's definitely.
I think we're disillusioned with the world in general.
Yeah.
And I think the way art was expressed, I mean, historically going all the way back, but even over the course of the 20th century, people started to feel like they couldn't identify with the protagonists anymore because life is filled with suffering and difficulty. And I think that's why you have Game of Thrones, which is in some ways the evil twin of Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was writing about ideals and what we should aspire to.
Right.
And his characters, I mean, did have flaws, but ultimately good wins, evil is defeated, and there are good guys and there are bad guys. Right. And he does play with the idea of wanting to have compassion for the bad guys. They're not really bad. It's just they've been wounded or hurt. Yeah. And let's enter into their subjective experience. Gollum being an important character. Right, now. But whereas George R.R. Martin, there are no good guys at all.
Yeah.
Everything is gray and ambiguous and confusing, which resonate with people because they're like, there are no Aragorns in the world.
Yeah.
Aragorn's like an archetype of Christ,
Right.
Or if someone is virtuous and honorable, they're punished for it. That's another theme in Martin's work.
Interesting.
But people, that seemed like the anti-hero, that was big in the 90s and the early 2000s, the anti-hero, which is a more real, it's not Superman who's flawless. It's not Captain America. It are these heroes that aren't something for us to aspire to. They're people that I can relate to. And in some ways, it's permissive of immoral choices, bad decisions, and it doesn't give us hope. It doesn't give us something to aspire to. And it's kind of depressing.
Yeah. I mean, you could say like, oh, that's more realistic, and maybe it is, but it's definitely good to have ideals to strive for. It's, to a goal to reach.
I mean, art imitates life. I mean, we're losing. There's very few heroes left in the world. There's very few role models that we can look up to, leaders that we can trust, whether that's in the Catholic Church. You have all these scandals, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time when just your local parish priest was someone that you could admire.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, I mean, people lead in relationships with their priests with distrust, suspicion, criticism, right? And I mean, if you can't trust priests, and with good reason,
right?
Yeah, in many cases, good reasons. But I mean, from at the local level, but all the way up to, I mean, politicians. I mean, we don't glorify them anymore. Celebrities, we don't glorify them anymore. That's the whole tabloid culture. Was us trying to break down these people that were once admired just for being a celebrity.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. They're not God.
Right.
But we're left now with no direction, and knowing that we can follow, knowing that we can trust. At least on a cultural level. Very few people. There's some, but very, very few people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. So I also wanted to talk to you about faith.
Yes.
And psychology. Yeah. So you're a Catholic guy.
I'm a Catholic guy.
Yeah. And something I know about you is that you're a Catholic guy and you live in Connecticut.
That's true.
And I was once a young adult man who was a Catholic guy and living in Connecticut and building off this theme of loneliness and isolation and disconnection. That was a very difficult time for me because I could not find a community.
Right.
Yeah. What's that like for you, being where you are, trying to live your faith now in a world where, like the in general, in a Western world, in an American world where the Catholic population is declining, and it's not like you can look around and find some Catholics to connect with, male or female, women to date, buddies to hang out with.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Where is it? What is it like for you now? What's the climate like now?
Yeah, I mean, having gone to like Catholic school all my life until college, that certainly has helped, I think, have a little bit more of a sense of community.
But were people practicing in your Catholic school?
Well, when they were younger, and their families probably did.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate just result of the times that you gradually see people kind of drift away.
It's the universities.
Well, yeah, a lot of ways, yeah. But it's also I think a lot of people I don't know. I can't say for sure. Obviously, it's different from person to person. It's not necessarily a rejection, an outright just rejection of faith. It's kind of just like a slow wane. It's kind of like, I could go to Mass. I mean, it kind of all starts with Mass, I think. I could go to Mass, but, I could do this instead on Sunday. Like, it's only one.
I could sleep in.
I could just sleep in, yeah. It's only one day, I could go next week. And then, gradually it goes from the majority of the weeks in the year you're going to the majority of the weeks you're not going, and it kind of just tapers off. And so, yeah, it's less, I think, about kind of, I reject this, I condemn it, kind of like publicly preaching that you're no longer. And it's more just like kind of, you forget about it, which I always find really tragic, because there's such a treasure in the history of the church and in the history of the faith in your family, like according to your family line. I just think of some of my grandparents who lived in Italy and stuff, and kind of just the fact that I have my faith
because of them
comes from them. I mean, I mean, just if I was I don't know, some other ethnicity coming over, like British or whatever, I wouldn't have that probably.
You're Italian?
I'm Italian, yeah.
100%?
50%. My dad's Italian.
Yeah, me too.
I have my Italian citizenship, actually.
Well, you don't look Italian. But neither
neither
do I. I mean, a little bit.
A little bit more. The darker the hair, you're kind of.
Well, I was a blonde growing up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was blonde growing up.
I look more Italian with the years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but the Italian culture is the Catholic faith was interwoven with the Italian culture.
Right.
And there's a pride in being Italian American. And if one of your parents is Italian, it doesn't really matter what the other parent is.
That's true.
It just takes over. So growing up, if I was identified with a particular culture where I spent my childhood, it was in in an Italian space.
Right.
And and now there's almost a separation between faith and an Italian culture anyway.
Yeah, to the extent that we are even lacking culture, I guess.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, so I mean, there's that. But I guess from day to day, I mean, I try to go to daily Mass, and
okay, so you're all in.
I'm pretty all in.
Yeah.
But the average age in daily Mass is probably 60.
What percentage of the blue-haired ladies at daily Mass, the daily communicants, think that pressure you? I'm just not saying that think, but pressure you to become a priest.
Not as many, because there was one other guy that went to daily Mass, and he actually is becoming a priest.
He was the target.
Yeah, he became.
They feel better.
The scapegoat.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced that though? I mean, I remember when I was young, I got that a lot.
Yeah.
I got that a lot.
Yeah, I think it's only natural. I've gotten that a bit.
Well, what's upset? Not that there's anything wrong with being a priest. I love our priests, but I think it says something about how rare it is to just find someone attempting to strive and live a life of holiness.
Yes.
In this world.
Yeah.
It's so deeply interwoven with clerical life, where it's like, oh, you must want to be a priest because you want to go to daily Mass and you take your faith seriously.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's no other explanation. Like, what do you mean? This is just really important to you, and you're living a non-clerical life? That's confusing to people.
Yeah. Now I had a friend. It was actually the same friend that was talking about quitting cross country in his mind. But he, when we went to high school together, and then we went to separate colleges and stuff. He was a couple years older than me, and after college, he decided he discerned a vocation, which is the popular terminology. He discerned.
He responded to the call.
Yes, to become a Benedictine monk, and so he's in the process of that now.
Yeah.
But it was just interesting, kind of after he moved away and is doing that in New Jersey, actually. And some of the people I was talking to, shortly after he kind of announced this, or more or less just this, people heard it through the grapevine or whatever. It's kind of like, oh yeah, did you hear about so-and-so?
Yeah.
And they were kind of like, yep, no surprise there. You know, we always basically thought he was like
We knew.
really religious
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, I guess that bothered me a bit because it's like,
Yeah.
so you're saying if he got married and had kids, then he has a pass to basically not live his faith to the fullest extent.
Right.
You know, he's not called to be a saint
Right.
because he's got other things to worry about.
Right.
So I don't know. It's
And it's also interesting because many people discover their faith once they become married and have children.
right.
They start to see things differently, and they see the value of
Yeah.
life and the experience of rearing children, and they're terrified of the world, and
Yeah.
they want what's best for their child, and then they start to discover faith and go back to church around that time in life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a straight. It's almost like a false dichotomy. It's like a false narrative about if like only clerics
hmm
live a life of faith.
Yeah.
In fact, we know that some clerics don't live a life of faith.
Yes. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, we have the catalog of saints that are the holy models of how to live a good Catholic life. And
Yes.
they're not all clerics.
Right.
You know, we don't canonize clerics just because you become a priest or you
Yeah,
become a
yeah.
religious,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So where are you at with those questions, if you don't mind me asking? Like the vocational discernment questions. Are you actively exploring those, like all of the areas, or where are you?
Yeah. Yeah. I I'm not set on one particular thing. I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think there's, I guess the problem, but also the good thing, is that either side you go, there's a lot of beauty in it.
Sure.
You know, you're as a as a man, you know, you're called to some kind of fatherhood. You grow from like kind of just a person to a father, whether that be biological fatherhood or whether that be spiritual fatherhood.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, you've chosen, but you've chosen the biological route.
I was
and that's
called.
good. You were called, yes. But yeah, you know, that you know, represents the family, represents the church. It represents, you know, the Trinity in a way, husband and wife and offspring.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of beauty there. On the other hand, you have you can provide something to people that lay people just can't. You can provide the sacraments. You can,
Sure.
you know, give yourself to God in a more intimate way.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the preoccupations of, you know, the necessary preoccupations of life when you
Yeah.
have to take care of your kids and go to
Yeah.
work and things like that. So,
And with celibacy, you are a sign that marriage is not an end,
that's correct. Yeah.
right? And you're a witness in the world to, as beautiful as marriage is,
Right.
that it's a sign of God's love for the soul.
Yeah.
And it's not going to fulfill you. It's not going to keep you
Right.
happy. I mean, I think anyone who's married will tell you that it doesn't take long for them to realize that their spouse is not going to fulfill them,
That's right.
no matter how happy the marriage is, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, the priesthood and the religious life are witness to that.
Yeah.
They're witness to that. And I would also add to what you were sharing there that all psychological maturity is bound in becoming a parent, right?
Yeah.
Becoming a father or becoming a mother is an indicator of one's psychological maturity, whether you have children or not.
Yeah.
And even if you're not a priest or religious, and even if you're married or not married, if you're a layperson, married or not married, the fruitfulness in serving will indicate your level of psychological maturity,
Right.
versus the selfishness that comes with just living a life for me.
Yeah.
So giving myself to the other, letting go of myself. We all know this intuitively. We don't like selfish people. Well, who's the least selfish person? Where do you learn unselfishness? Like through being a parent.
Yeah.
You know? And in some ways you're forced into it in a more profound way, because you have to wake up and feed that child, you know,
Yeah.
in the early years. I mean, you don't have to, but there's a strong compulsion to,
Right.
because of the emotional connection to the child. So in some ways it's a mercy that we have to suffer for children if you're in married life.
Yeah.
because otherwise it's very easy to be complacent and, spend your Saturday watching football, not thinking of anybody else or whatever someone's particular version of that, of a selfish sort of life is. Like self-gift is reflective of psychological maturity. And in some ways, I think the priesthood, in a large sweeping way, is an expression of self-gift because of the sacrifice of giving up marriage and family life, which is a good, right? But in the day-to-day, there's nothing necessarily that forces you to give of yourself, in my opinion. Now, I'm not a priest. I'm sure there's priests going to leave messages in the comments here. But in the same way a child does, where there's someone asking for you to give yourself to them. By someone, I mean like a 3-year-old.
Right.
I want to measure this because I know that there are tremendous demands on priests. But I mean, I also know priests who can kind of just shut their door and shut their door and not give. And, and make sure they, it's only one homily a week. I'm not going to change it for whoever comes to mass in the particular masses, or, I'm only going to do confession between this hour and this hour. And if someone asks me, during the week, I don't really have time for that. I know priests who spend their hours in their afternoons playing video games all day. I do.
Wow.
In my work, I mean, I work with all sorts of people.
Okay,
it's not a characterization of all priests. There's some wonderful holy priests out there. But I think there's a way in which in one's priesthood you can hide, that you can't hide. I cannot hide from my daughter.
Right.
Like I cannot hide from my son. But I think because of the proximity to important relationships, or the lack of proximity to important relationships, key relationships, intimate relationships in the priesthood, there's a way in which you can kind of go about your life and no one's going to bother you about it. So it becomes more of a choice, an act of the will to give yourself to the flock and to give yourself to the faithful. So it's, I think I'd like to add that there's a lot of variance here. I know there are very, very busy priests who are giving of themselves, and there's a lot of demands on their time and schedule. And they're working late into the evenings with meetings and things like that. Right, I've just seen both. And I guess it probably be fair to say that there are deadbeat dads out there too that don't give to their families. So maybe, now that I think it through, there's probably more akin than is different. But in any event, the initial point was, when you choose a vocation, when you respond to a call, you go in a particular direction, your psychological maturity also is bound up in your capacity to give yourself.
Right. Yeah.
So where are you, what kind of devotions do you have? Like, what is your particular expression of your faith?
That's an interesting question.
What are you attracted to? Catholic meaning universal, right? It's a big word.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways to be Catholic. What draws you from your own psychology to a particular dimension of being Catholic?
I definitely, just all the different forms of prayer that are available are really interesting, whether you're doing the Liturgy of the Hours or you're doing the Rosary or whatever you do the Angelus every day or something like that.
You do the Liturgy of the Hours?
My brother does, actually, yeah. But
that's a commitment.
I've experimented with that in the past.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, something about reading through a lot of Psalms. And I think I get a little bit,
Right.
But
it's like, it's an invitation to really be present and enter into something emotional. I think the Psalms elicit and evoke an emotional dimension to who we are. The Rosary, it does if you choose to enter into it. I mean, I guess the Psalms are the same way, but you really have to stop with the Psalms.
Yeah.
And kind of block everything else out and enter into them in a very unique way. And if you're busy and you have things to do, it's like, all right.
Well, the Rosary is nice because it's very contemplative. You reach a certain point, I don't know, whatever age you start learning the Hail Mary, you can rattle off a Hail Mary almost without even thinking about it. And so you can think about a lot of other things and reflect on yourself, consider other people's prayer intentions, things like that.
Yeah, the words become autopilot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas the Psalms, I guess I don't necessarily know anyone that knows the Psalms well enough to be able to
rattle them off.
Yeah.
Some savant out there.
So you really have to if you want to get something out of it, you have to really focus on the words.
I have the Lord is my shepherd down, but that's like the extent of it. I shall not want. That's about it. The one that everybody knows. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's about it. Was it Psalm 23? 23. I'm Catholic, so I don't know anything about scripture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But,
so you're attracted to that. Any particular saints you're interested in?
I was going to say the saints are another thing that I think is just reading about the lives of the saints, which I have more in the past, probably like 1 or 2 years. Yeah, some of the saints are amazing. Like, I mean, the big ones like Saint Padre Pio, excuse me.
Saint Pio. It's
Saint
weird.
Pio. Saint Pio of Pietrelcina.
I think I knew of him before he was Saint Pio, so it's weird to call him Saint Pio. Yeah. He was just Padre Pio.
Yeah, my grandmother had a devotion to him for a long time, and he was Padre Pio always. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's amazing.
Italian.
Another Italian there. Saint Gerard, another Italian. Great devotion, great life. Died very young. So a lot of saints. Saint Therese of Lisieux died very young.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Padre Pio, I mean, he was a modern saint in the sense that even during his life, there were so many supernatural experiences that people had with him. There were so many miracles, and that's not necessary or a requirement to become a saint. The miracles, they assess miracles afterwards. In fact, you just need to live a holy life. You don't actually need to do anything miraculous. But Padre Pio himself, I mean, from reading hearts to bilocating to healing to the stigmata and like in a materialistic world that we live in, not in the sense that like people are materialistic, but like philosophically, that we lived in a closed universe, that matter is the only thing that there is. There's nothing supernatural outside of that. Right. Then you have Padre Pio living as a witness of like miracles left and right. Like he's such a great witness to the faith.
He seemed to have, maybe, well, I won't judge all the saints here, but compared to some saints, he seemed to have this, direct line sort of to the supernatural. Like he would kind of receive messages from other people's guardian angels, he claimed, and kind of like send his guardian angel on missions and things. And
it's a fight with Satan.
He used to fight with Satan. I mean, so I mean, when he actually, the interesting thing, I don't want to go too. This is
no, this is great.
But he actually said basically with a straight face, with basically no doubt, that there were other life forms on other planets.
He did,
and that they were God's children too.
Really?
Yeah. So that's very, because it
makes sense.
I guess he could be wrong. He could have just been guessing, but he teaches with authority. But
he's not speaking from the chair.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But that's interesting, because if he has such an insight into the supernatural,
sure,
you almost wonder, what's going on out there.
What else did he know?
Yeah, what else did he know? Yeah. So that's really cool. But.
Yeah, I always laugh at this story about him, where he was in bed one time and he woke up, and Satan was standing at the end of his bed, and he said, "Oh, it's you." And he pulled the blanket over him and he turned over. Imagine,
Well, it becomes mundane. I guess,
he was visited by demons pretty frequently and beat up, and he'd have bruises. I mean, if you believe, we have lots of people that watch the show that don't believe in any of this and explain it away. But I mean, if you're a believer, he's one of those examples that was alive not very long ago.
Right.
Did he die in the 60s? Or
I think it was the 60s.
Yeah, he died in the 60s.
The interesting thing about that, though, is that, I guess we still kind of line up like living a virtuous life with receiving a lot of happiness in this life and having life be easy, sort of. And it's like you have Padre Pio, who's probably the most virtuous person alive in like the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And he was actively beaten by Satan,
and bleeding constantly.
And he was bleeding. It was embarrassing. It was painful, I'm sure.
Yeah. He suffered. Yeah. For all his gifts, he suffered. And I think that's the temptation that we all have, is that when we're given gifts, what do we do with those gifts? I mean, do we serve ourselves or do we serve others? Yeah. I mean, that's the difference between a hero and a villain. Right. They all have superpowers. The difference is like, are you serving yourself or are you serving other people?
Yeah.
And if you're given a tremendous amount of gifts, like, what do you do with that? It's not to serve yourself.
Right.
And he was given supernatural gifts. And so almost like the check and balance of all the gifts that he was given was the humbling through suffering. And if I have this, I mean, I'm not a PO scholar here, but if I remember correctly, he wasn't even allowed to say mass or give or preach publicly. I think he could give confession, maybe not, but for a decade, while they investigated, while the church sort of investigated him and was suspicious of his following and like it was almost cultish.
Right.
And he was obedient.
Yeah.
He was obedient to that, and that's the greatest witness. Right. Is that he was obedient to Mother Church and obedient to his bishop. You find other examples in the church nowadays of personalities who the church pushes back against, and they don't comply,
right?
And they're not obedient. Padre Pio was like, yeah, I mean, whatever you want, I'll stop. Like, it's fine. It's fine. And imagine the suffering that came from not being able to administer the sacraments in that way and to conduct public mass. I mean, for the priest, the sacramental life is like engaging with their spouse.
Right.
You know, like imagine, okay, you can't talk to your wife for 10 years. You know, I'm sure that was agony.
Some people probably would like that.
Well, depending on the marriage. You're right. That's a good point. Yeah. Right. So what are you working on in yourself right now?
That's a maybe broad question, but
purposely open-ended.
Yeah, I guess for me the question, I guess it goes with kind of the overall vocation, but not really necessarily vocation with a capital V or whatever. How best can I just use the gifts that I've been given to do something impactful, and I guess not really even impactful, because we're not necessarily called to succeed or to be
called to be faithful.
Right. So how can you do something that's, I guess, good, that's leads toward kind of the
building of the kingdom.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's that sounds maybe a bit cliched or whatever. It's like, how can I change? Everybody wants to change the world. And, but I guess it's you look at a lot of different. It's even something like writing. It's like, well, does me being in this room alone, typing this out, does that conduce to anyone's good? Maybe once this is published, I would hope that something can come out of it.
Sure.
Something can there's things in there that I've included that tie in with my faith necessarily, because that's just so much a part of who I am that it comes through.
Yeah.
Even
if unconsciously.
Even if unconsciously, but often explicitly. But
yeah.
But yeah, so it's kind of a question of there's I always think of the story of the servants and the servant who buries his talent in the ground. And you want to avoid that as much as possible, but sometimes you don't even know if you're burying your talent, or if you just do it because you're just kind of going along, and you're not you're living kind of a comfortable life, and you're not sure am I supposed to be doing something radical right now, or am I supposed to be doing something, am I supposed to be the saint who gets a martyr's death in the most extravagant way, or am I supposed to be the saint who is the monastery doorkeeper for 40 years? Both get to heaven.
Or am I the saint that's supposed to love his children?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know, it's ongoing. But
yeah, well, that seems like a perfect segue. Am I supposed to do radical things in Japan, which I'm very interested in anyway? So you chose this movie, Silence. And I'll tell you, so my first reaction, you're not the first guest to suggest a movie like this for me. And I'm not very holy. And I like my comforts.
Yeah.
And a part of me was like, why do I have to watch this movie? It's like watching The Passion. It's like, I know it's good for me, but I want to sit in this pain and suffering for this is a 3-hour movie. You're putting, this is a 3-hour movie. And, I had another guest, you can look up the episode, folks, who made me watch A Hidden Life. Okay. It was the same kind of experience. It's a very Catholic film, and it's meditative and contemplative and difficult to sit in, even though I know it's good for me. So thank you for allowing me to suffer. Why did you choose this film? Let another open-ended question. Why did you choose this film?
I choose the film. One, I think because it ties in with Japan well. And some of my experiences there.
If people are watching just a snapshot of this, go back and watch earlier on.
Yes. Link in the description.
In the description, yeah. Yeah, go back and watch more about David's discussion of his fascination with Japan.
So there's that. Also, just the history of Christianity in Japan is very, very interesting to me. And I read the book recently for Silence.
Before or after?
After, yeah. So I saw the movie probably like 3 or so years ago. Yeah. And then just recently I read the book because I was kind of investigating different Japanese authors and stuff. Yeah. And yeah, the author who wrote not to focus on the movie, but also the book, the author who wrote it, he was Japanese, and it was in a unique position because he was a Japanese Catholic. And there aren't many of those. No. So I
looked it up. It's like 1% of the population, right? It's like 1.5%.
Yeah. And I went to church every week in Japan when I was there. And it was, if I think that the daily mass attendance here is bad, that is kind of like a dying breed, literally, the Catholics in Japan. And it's, but basically, once upon a time, Catholicism was flourishing in Japan, with, I don't know if you want me to give a little historical context to the movie. Sure. But so to go back, there was this period of time in the 1400s and 1500s in Japan called the Warring States period, and so Japan was just in constant turmoil. There were these different feudal lords. And they each controlled their own domain, and so there was no unity, and so they were always trying to.
It's the world of the samurai, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And so then, in the I think either mid or more toward the late 1500s, there was this guy by the name of Oda Nobunaga, and he consolidated almost all of Japan. Right. And he actually was very, I think it was during this time that Francis Xavier arrived in Japan. And he was the first missionary to bring Catholicism to Japan. Another great saint. And so the kind of de facto leader of Japan, this Nobunaga, he is actually very favorably disposed to the Jesuits and the Franciscans and all the missionaries, because maybe he was attracted to the religion, but probably more so he was very interested in getting the Portuguese trade and things like that. And so, in the book of Silence, and I think maybe they reference it a little bit in the movie, the kind of missionary leader of the Jesuits, who the two main characters were talking to at the beginning of the movie, saying, "Where's Father Ferreira?" Yeah. He's actually based on a real life person. His name is Valignano, Italian. And he was saying, in the book, he says basically, like, there was a time in Japan where we were doing so well with our religion that when we were trying to pick out our priestly robes, we were deciding, like, should we do silk or should we do, they were dealing with just kind of the trivials because everything was going so well. Yeah. And then with the next ruler, there was kind of this sense, there was this growing suspicion toward Christians because they were, where were their loyalties? Were they loyal to the emperor or to the shogun? Yes. Or were they loyal to the Pope and to these foreign powers? Sure. So there was more suspicion.
Which in a larger context was changing Japan. Right. From a Japanese perspective, not for the better. Like Western culture, Western ideas. Yeah.
Right. And Japan was looking at some of the surrounding neighbors like Macau and things like that, and seeing them quickly become colonies
Right.
of these foreign powers. And
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to become a colony, really?
Right.
So, so as they went along, I mean, so the following leader was Hideyoshi, his name was, and he, I don't know if you've ever heard of the 26 martyrs of Japan.
Yes.
Yeah, so he killed 26 or 23 Franciscans, I think, and a few others, a couple of Jesuits. But then, things were pretty good for a while, and then with the following leader, Christianity was just banned altogether. The missionaries were expelled, and effectively, you were left with a whole population of Christians who were without leadership and were actively being persecuted.
Right.
So.
And that's where the movie.
So that's where the movie takes place in kind of the mid, I think, 17th century.
1630.
1630 something, yeah.
Yeah, that's like where the Father Ferreira begins in 1630, right. And then the two younger priests, 9 years later, 1640 or something like that.
Yeah,
something like that.
I think in 1638 there was something called the Shimabara Rebellion, and basically it was like kind of a grassroots sort of trying to overthrow the local lord. Mm-hmm. It was near Nagasaki, and that was kind of like, there were a lot of Christians involved in that.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the death blow. It was like, all right, so now these people are trying to be revolutionaries. Now they're
right.
trying to.
Yeah.
And so then after that, where these guys come in, everything is being persecuted.
Right. So. Okay. So, why did you choose this movie? First, now that we've lost, 70% of our viewers. No, I'm teasing. I love history. I was a history major. I'm teasing. But why did you choose?
Yeah.
You personally, you're drawn to this because of your fascination with Japan. But are there any other reasons besides the intersection between the Catholic faith and the Japanese culture, or what more is there to this for you?
Also, I guess the main question of the movie is basically, if you're presented with this lose-lose situation, which is renounce your faith or die a martyr, basically. Renounce your faith and live with disgrace, basically. Or, die. You die admirably, but it's still painful and it's still a horrible way to die.
Yeah.
What do you do? Mm-hmm. And, you can look at it from so many different, the kind of core Catholic, cheerleader sort of mentality is like, never give up your faith. Like if I was in that position, I wouldn't step. They were called the fumie, the images of Jesus that the Christians were ordered to step on or spit on to show that they weren't Christian, that they were Buddhist.
Yes.
And so it's, what do you do? Do you for a lot of these peasant people, not stepping on it and dying was probably preferable in a lot of ways, because their lives were so hard from day to day. They had to pay, terribly high taxes, and they had to work like long hours in the field and stuff. So it was like, if I can have this release, that's great. But you are dying at the end of the day. And if you're in a leadership position,
painful death.
A very painful death. And especially if you're in a leadership position like these two priests, mm-hmm. The question is, do I stay alive and keep this operation going by maybe just for now, for formality's sake, stepping on this and renouncing my faith and then operating in the shadows, or do I accept the martyr's death?
Right.
So.
Right. And and so where do you fall?
I don't know. I mean, it's
a provocative film.
It really is.
It makes you question what would seem to be the most obvious answer.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, so Martin Scorsese did the film, and
I read an interview with him afterwards.
Yeah, and he describes himself as a lapsed Catholic.
Right.
Like he loves the Catholic faith from a cultural perspective, but he doesn't necessarily practice it.
Right.
And so that comes across. The ending of the movie is a bit different from the ending of the book, because in the movie, after apostatizing, the priest dies after living all those years, and then they show, not to give away spoilers, but
spoiler. No, yeah. Go watch the film. We're going to talk about it. Go on.
But at the end of the film, when he dies, they show like, oh look,
There's a crucifix.
He's a crucifix. He was a Catholic the whole time.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a you have your cake and eat it too, I think, which is kind of what Martin Scorsese, I think, wants. He wants to have the beauty of Catholicism culturally, but not have to commit to it spiritually.
Sure.
Whereas in the book, it doesn't make it that explicit. It kind of says that, so he hears Christ talking to him from the thing he's about to step on, the image he's about to step on, and he steps and he feels like this overwhelming sensation of love and kind of outpouring himself. And so I think it's kind of like I'm, by kind of despising the thing that I love more than anything, I'm sharing with Christ's suffering. I'm becoming kind of a equal partner in this suffering of Christ.
Sure.
Which, is that actually true? I don't know, because you're giving up your faith. And Father Ferreira says in the film, he's like, if Christ were here, he would have apostatized, which is kind of, it's weird to even think that's, think how that could, Christ is denying himself. I don't know, but so it's
I have so many reactions. Go on.
Yeah. And so the book, I mean, I think the author, being a Japanese Catholic, he was really trying to understand, like, what is Catholicism for him in a country where it's been persecuted for so long, where a lot of the beliefs that they have just been borrowed from abroad. It's not, they can't really make it their own yet. Like, Japanese Christianity hasn't been allowed to prosper and grow enough to make it really, something that they can own as their own. And so it's kind of like, where do we find ourselves here? Like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, I want this to be a conversation rather than a monologue for me. Yeah. So I want to go back and forth because I have so many thoughts. It seems to me that the theme of the film is that a personal relationship with Christ is more important than what the church teaches.
Yes.
Which, in a certain sense, is true. The lie is that you cannot have a personal relationship with Christ apart from what the church teaches.
Right. I think that's true. Yeah, Father, for the Liam Neeson character, Father Ferreira, says, like, you're just concerned about what the church will think of you.
Yeah, the church's judgment isn't as important.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
But if we believe that the church, the Catholic Church, is equivalent to the body of Christ,
yes,
and Christ is the head, then separating yourself from that church is, like cutting off a hand from, cutting off an arm from the body. So
now, I think one legitimate point is that God alone judges the heart.
True.
So it may be that if someone denounces Christ or lives an immoral life, that in his mercy, he can envelop you.
Right.
But that doesn't change the fact that the act was immoral.
Right.
And he would not want you to commit that immoral act. So the character experiencing love as he apostatizes from Christ is not because he did the right thing. It's because Christ loves him.
Right. I think, there are obviously, like, I guess, unlike some other Christian denominations, like, we learn that there are different degrees of sin. And so you could say that, so if you apostatize because someone's, you're walking down the street, someone says, do you believe in God? And you say, no way. I think that's a lot different than if you're under extreme torture.
Certainly.
And you apostatize. So there is a gradient, but at the end of the day, there's a line that you have to hold, I think.
Right. It doesn't change the objective value of the act itself.
Right.
Moral theology will tell you that the act, like for what goes into a mortal sin, the act itself, the intentions, and the circumstances.
Right.
So only in terms of mitigating culpability and responsibility. And we can't even assess that.
Yeah.
Only God assesses that.
Right.
It's basically a statement on how God assesses, like, the state of our soul.
Right.
But the you cannot, if an act is intrinsically evil, objectively evil, it can never become a good act, no matter what the circumstances and the intentions of the act committer.
Right.
So, I mean, we have a long tradition of martyrdom. going back to, the book of Maccabees, where a
Right.
mother is saying, hey, sons, please don't denounce God. Go ahead and die,
Yeah.
right? And the character in the film was in much the same position.
Right.
And he said, no, step on it, trample it, apostatize to those people. That's not actually loving them.
Right.
It's not actually loving them. And I wonder, Scorsese does present in the middle of the film the properly Catholic way to approach the problem of suffering and evil. But the protagonist, in some ways, I would argue, from a true Catholic perspective, fails in that regard in the end. But before that, the peasants have the right idea. They were actually martyred.
Right.
The ones in the ocean, right? And then I remember when he was first caught and captured, and you see sort of the first sign of doubt when he starts questioning after they died, like, did they die for the wrong reasons? They could have lived. And then when he's caught sort of in the wild, when he's on his own, and he gets put with the other peasants, he's like, why are you so calm? Don't you know you're about to die? And she's like, well, this life's like pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Like, if I die, which will be very quick, like, I'll be with God in heaven. Like, isn't that better?
Yeah.
Like, she's right.
Yeah.
But he doesn't get that. So to me, it's a larger commentary on the different relationships to pain and suffering, and what is pain and suffering, and what is death. And to me, it's like preserving human life above all things, even over morality, seems to be the proposition of the film. It's pretty clear that denouncing God is an immoral act. Christ says, he who denies me here, I will denounce in front of my Father in heaven.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. There's more.
No. I just want to add that point. But Scorsese is offering the idea that avoid suffering, even if it means denouncing your faith.
Yeah, I think that's something. And again, maybe if you're lapsed in your Catholicism, you kind of don't see that sort of tradition over of the martyrs over the years and everything. But yeah, I guess we live in a culture that, except in some circumstances, preserving life is kind of like the highest good. Preserving your own life selfishly. And we might not believe that in the cases of abortion and things like that, but preserving life is important. But when you live only for, I guess this goes back to what we were saying about selfishness. And if you live only for yourself, because what were they? What were the apostate priests living for after their apostasy?
I feel like the actors in the film portrayed how much shame they felt.
Yeah. All they were stuck doing from then on was writing like whatever they were told to, basically, and
they look like zombies.
Yeah. I think they did do a good job.
They weren't filled with life there.
Yeah.
And what did you make of the attempt to offer the Japanese viewpoint?
Kind of the thing about the different wives of that. Things like that.
Yeah.
And I guess also the swamp and
the swamp
like
analogy, and that listen, Christianity works in your place, but it doesn't work in our place.
Yeah.
And and then some of Liam Neeson's characters, Father Ferreira's perspective was incredibly dangerous to a Catholic worldview. He was saying that the local Japanese people never accepted Catholicism as you understand it.
Right.
It was absorbed into their syncretic view of reality, that this was just a Christ and God is just one God among many. There's a language issue. There's a translation issue. They don't even really believe.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about? And then and then later on, what pride you have. Were you identifying with Christ in the garden? That's so prideful.
Yeah.
And it's like this dark temptation. Like, no, like we're invited into the Paschal mystery.
Yeah.
You know, and he not because we are deserving or prideful, but he came to suffer with us to give us a model. And so we relate to his experience of suffering in some ways. It gives shape and adds meaning to it. And that's what he was experiencing in that cell right before his death.
Right.
Or not his death, but his temptation to die.
Yeah.
But like some of the messages and Liam Neeson being the mouthpiece for those messages, I thought were really problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I was thinking throughout it that, so Buddhism is kind of the thing that they were making everyone submit to. Like
Yes.
you had to register with a Buddhist temple
Yes.
as a person, as a citizen, and so forth. Buddhism itself is a foreign religion from India
Yes.
that the Japanese took and adapted, and
Yes.
you know, there was kind of the Zen Buddhist line and things like that. I'm no expert in Buddhism, but
Yeah.
that was, you know, absorbed and made kind of personal to the Japanese. And I think what Liam Neeson, I mean, you don't want, you know, heresies, you don't want really fundamental flaws with the faith that distort the religion so much that, yeah, it's something completely foreign.
Right.
But I think that, you know, any culture that receives the Catholic faith, they have to make it their own.
Definitely.
And I think that, you know, God uses kind of our whole history, the whole human history,
Sure.
to bring us. And, you know, some of the traditions, some of the religious practices, even in pagan religions, you know, can kind of be claimed by Catholicism as something that can be used for helping people learn. And I think even when he says, you know, all of our missionary work was pointless because the Japanese people were worshiping the sun all along,
Right.
basically.
Yes.
You don't want Japanese people to worship the sun, but if that's their next step toward understanding that you can build upon, and you say, well, maybe it's not this, but it's actually this.
It's preparatory.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's valuable in and of itself too, I think.
Yeah, but it is not. I thought Garfield's character, Father, what's his name?
Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yeah. When he was debating with the governor, with the inquisitor,
Right.
he actually offered the right perspective. The Catholic faith, the Christian faith, it cannot be considered one faith among many. And like with this overview, it's like it's at a permissible standpoint among many permissible
Right.
standpoints and beliefs. No, it's a monotheistic revolution. Pope Benedict talks about this, about the three different ways. Like there's skepticism, I don't believe in any of it. Then there's the syncretic sort of pantheistic absorption into the all one,
Right.
you know, or into the all nothing, and that's like a lot of the Eastern faiths.
Right.
And then there's the monotheistic revolution, which says that God from outside of space and time enters in and tells us about himself and radically challenges the ideas of a paganistic worldview.
Yeah.
It's not absorbed into something different. It's saying this is the truth.
Right.
And if truth is truth, it's true for everyone in all cases. There's no way it's true in Portugal, but not in Japan.
Right.
Right. And the I understand a Buddhist worldview, which is that it's all fine. It's all fine. Christ, it's great. It's great if you like Christ, but I don't have to. I don't have to, and that's okay too. But a monotheistic approach or a Christian approach would say, no, your view is preparatory for the fullness of truth, but you don't truly have it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought Rodriguez, like on his knees when they were debating, offered the right perspective, and then, I mean, just that dark moment of temptation, everything coming his way, I think he succumbed to it.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's the question then becomes, you know, if you're in his position, or if any of us are in his position, under temptation, under suffering, under the pain of suffering, under the suffering of others,
Sure.
what do you do? Yeah, how do you act in that position?
Well, I mean, for me, like, I'd probably fail.
Yeah, I don't know about me either.
No,
but...
I would hope that I would respond to the grace that was offered to me to stay the course. I mean, I certainly am not judging him, which again I think is the point of one of the points of the film, which is, who knows, God alone judges. That's a very complex moral dilemma, and there were significant psychological and physical stressors placed upon him, which probably hampered both his intellect and his will.
Right.
Let God sort that out. I don't know.
Yeah.
But in terms of it being the norm or what is acceptable, that's what I have an issue with.
Yeah.
But I really, really admired the faith of the peasants.
Yeah.
You know, their longing for the priests to administer the sacraments, and they didn't actually worship the priests,
Right.
but they reverenced them because of what they were able to provide.
Right.
They knew, and they lived so long in a world where they didn't have mass, they didn't have confession.
Right. The testament to that is that in reality, so after the persecutions lasted for, I guess, over 2 centuries. Mm-hmm. And then in like the kind of latter half of the 1800s, finally things were modernized a little bit. Finally, foreigners were allowed to come back into Japan. And there was, I think, again, it was an Italian priest who came to Nagasaki to start up a church in like the 1860s. And he came to this neighborhood to build a church mainly for the foreigners that were living there. Like the Dutch came, or the Portuguese came back, and, you know, so there were a lot of foreigners. Well, we need to have a church. And there was a group of Catholics, or there were a group of Japanese people who came to him and they said, we're Catholics. Like, we've been, for the past like 200 years, we've been baptizing each other and we've been carrying
without any guide.
Without any guide.
Yeah.
And here we are, we'd like to be accepted, like, we'd like to be formally baptized, I guess, and accepted into the church. And actually, it's interesting, there's a few islands off the coast of Japan, even today, where, I guess because of a disconnect or whatever, they never like rejoined with the church. So now their practices are still kind of these practices of hidden Christians where they worship like statues that are kind of like the Buddha, but they're disguised. They're Mary, but they're disguised to look like Buddhist images and stuff. So there's kind of like this sort of like remnant of that time, even like to show that history lasted so long. Yeah.
What was the character's name? The Japanese character's name that kept repenting.
Oh, Kichijiro.
Kichijiro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think of Kichijiro and his story and his consistent moral failings and then request for repentance? And he described himself as a weak man.
Yeah.
And bemoaned the fact that he was living in a time of persecution because it was bound to make him fail. Yeah. And then he had these periods of repentance afterwards. But you're left to wonder, how deep were they? But up until a point, because the most interesting request was when it was years later.
Right.
That suggests to me that all the other ones were real. What'd you make of him?
Well, I guess the gut feeling is that Kichijiro is all of us, to the extent that Andrew Garfield's character kind of represents Christ in the context. We always just keep crawling back, literally. In his case, literally crawling back.
Yeah.
So that's something we can learn from. But yeah, his point about like, if I had been born in a different time, like my life could have been like if he would have been born, you know, before all the persecution started, and when it was actually probably popular to be a Catholic in Japan, to be a Christian in Japan.
He'd be a great Christian.
Yeah, he could just kind of, you know, coast by. You know, maybe he has a few crosses to bear here and there, but like, you know, he would he would die happily, and he'd you know, maybe hopefully go to heaven. But if you're not, then what do you do in that circumstance? I mean,
but his failures too weren't always just a reluctance to apostatize. Because he turned them in, more than once. Yeah. So he chose to accept the money, the 300 silver, to turn in Rodriguez, Father Rodriguez, Padre, and then I think it alludes to the fact that he turned in the village.
Maybe, yeah. I guess that was maybe left a little unclear, but you could suspect them certainly.
Right, and then we don't even know why Goto was razed to the ground.
Right.
So it would seem that he was someone that like gave into the temptation for money, not just I couldn't, you know, I'm scared under pain of death, I'm going to denounce God.
Yeah.
There's like a whole kind of immoral system
Yeah, it's one thing to be weak, and it's one thing to, I guess, have like this disordered nature that allows, that you desire to sin, or you want to inform on people. You want to sin. You're attracted to the
free
sin
choice.
almost.
Yeah. Free choice. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Now you read the book.
yeah.
Was that confession scene, which occurred much later on in the book, as well?
Yes. Yeah, it was actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in the movie it remains a little bit vague whether he actually administers confession or not. I think he kind of puts his hand on his head, but it's like,
Yeah.
is he just blessing him? Is he just kind of praying to himself? In the book, I think he actually says, like, I might be disgraced in the eyes of the church, but seeing there is no other priest in all of Japan to administer you confession, like, I will do it, basically.
So he never lost his faith.
So, yeah, they say in the book, I think, that, like, I think he's speaking to Christ and he says, like, I love you, but, like, now in a new way, in a different way or something. My faith is,
Yeah.
my love for you has changed.
Yeah.
And, I guess...
Yeah, the dialogue between him and Christ
was
so interesting. And there was a little bit of, there was some, I don't want to go as far as to say heresy, but when Scorsese was speaking for Christ.
Yeah.
They put the words in his mouth. I don't know if it was in the book in this way.
Yeah.
But he said, I came to take away your pain. No, he didn't.
Right.
He did not come to take away our pain. He came to suffer with us. That part was right.
Right.
But it's like that last step, I came to take your pain away. No.
Yeah.
He came to offer salvation and ultimately take our pain away, but not so that we can, make whatever moral decisions we want to avoid pain in this life. Yeah. So that I thought was misleading and dangerous in terms of spiritual guidance. And, a lot of Catholics today in the United States don't really follow much of what the church teaches. They don't know, in other words, what the church teaches. And maybe their only exposure to what is spiritually healthy might come through a film like this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of dangerous.
Well, I know, as someone who wants to create media or wants to create something that people will consume in an entertaining way, I definitely, while I'm writing, I feel a very strong responsibility for what I'm writing, for people that consume it. And, maybe there's an age range and stuff, and you suggest people don't watch this at a certain age for certain content. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you risk, like, scandal, I guess is the proper term in the church, in Catholic teaching. If you risk scandal, then that's kind of on you, I think, as a creator. And so, yeah.
Well, any other thoughts on the film that are worth sharing?
Yeah, I think we got most of the central stuff.
Yeah, the film's called Silence.
Yeah. It's
about God's silence in the face of suffering.
Right.
The experience was one of silence. And I just my heart breaks for the main character, because it seemed like he said all of the right things right up until that point.
Yeah.
It's not that God was not with me. He was with me, and I discovered him in the silence. I mean, he was saying that right in the cell.
Yeah.
Right beforehand. And then just the witness to other people suffering was enough to have him lose his faith.
Yeah.
And it's almost like too much empathy, where you're not acting in accordance with what is good for those that you love. That it's almost like permissive. It's like permissive parents.
Right.
Okay, you don't have to take the trash out because it's so upsetting to you. No, you have to take the trash out even though it's upsetting to you.
Yeah.
In fact, like the masculine gift, like true paternal love, is to say, I love you more than your emotions or your suffering. And so I care about your suffering, but I do want what is good for you.
Right.
And then Adam Driver's character seems like he did triumph.
Yeah. I mean, he got... I guess, like, if Andrew Garfield's character was given the same opportunity as him, because when people are drowning in the ocean and you go after them and then you drown, that's kind of like, okay, you've fulfilled your call, you've died a martyr's death.
Yes.
When people are hanging upside down in the pits like that,
and you're given a choice,
you can't and do a handstand, and you can't kind of join in their suffering and do anything that's anything short of suicide, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I think he was dealt maybe a
different hand.
Different hand. I guess you could say a better hand.
And it's funny too, because going back and you look at their relationship, Garfield's character was much healthier and much more, it would seem, spiritually advanced. He said the right things, you know, and where the Driver's character was more short-tempered, angry, was doubtful. He would describe himself as cowardice. You know, these people died for me. Andrew Garfield's like, they didn't die for us. Like, that is an amazing spiritual answer. They didn't die for us.
Right.
You know, but then when it came down to the end result of which one stayed consistent with church teaching and stayed loyal to their faith, it wasn't Garfield's character.
Right.
It's almost like they swapped roles.
Yeah. Well, I guess there was the point where they were asking them what should the peasants were saying, what should we do? Should we step or should we trample or not? And Andrew Garfield said, you must trample, like it's good. And
he said, what are you talking about?
Yeah, he said, you can't do that. You can't do that. So,
yeah.
So I guess maybe that was the point at which they diverged.
Yes.
And then their paths went from there to their natural conclusions, I guess. Yeah.
Well, good movie. I'm glad I watched it. It was a difficult watch.
Not something you can just sit back with on Saturday night.
No, you gotta understand what I do all day. I'm in a dark place with people suffering all day. Like, I want to come home and watch Seinfeld or something. No. I'm teasing. I'm grateful that I watched it. Yeah, it was a really good film. I probably wouldn't have watched it in any other context, and it is provocative. It does make you think, and it you know, to Scorsese's credit, I was talking to my wife about this last night, and she was like, well, why would you make this movie? I was like, well, to get us arguing about it, to get us talking about it.
It raises an interesting question.
It is a good film.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Even if there's dimensions to it that we would push back on from a truly Catholic angle.
Right.
So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything you want to plug? I mean, do you have a book title? Stay tuned.
Working title. But,
okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to plug really.
Okay.
Not yet. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah. I'll have to give heed to my thanks too.
Definitely.